Looks
And
good.
with that, okay, let's start. Okay. Yeah, I need a bigger screen set. Anyway, just wanted to touch on leases. You know, with seasoned agents, sometimes they don't like to work with leases because leases basically take the same amount of time, whether you're listing or you're taking out a client to find a property to lease. It's the same amount of time as a purchase deal. And so a lot of the times, this is one of the ways for new agents to get involved with the real estate process in general. And with that, what I mean is it gets you exposed to listing properties for lease, taking out clientele to purchase a house, even though, with all honesty, I mean, especially in a buyer's market, leases are still harder to do than purchases because you're basically presenting a client to a landlord and there has to be an acceptance. Where on a purchase side, if you're paying the price that the seller is looking for, you pretty much have the deal. So with that, I'm just going to go through the different slides and kind of talk to it. I won't read all of the points in the slides. I'll leave that for you to look at, and I believe you received the handout as well. But we're just going to, you know, basically, I'll leave it up for a couple of minutes. And if you have any questions with respect to any of these points, please. Either raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask a question right away. So again, as I mentioned, leases take the same amount of time as a listing. Also, leases take the same amount of effort as a listing. And from a sales income perspective, a lease commission is usually a lot less. It's approximately 10% of a sale. Okay. All the same client duties are required of you. So basically you have to, abide by all the rules and regulations of dealing with your clients. So how are leases good? So for new realtors, a lease basically gives you experience. It's an opportunity to get you exposed to the process of the real estate cycle, whether you're taking a client out to find a property or you're listing a property for sale. Or for lease, that for that matter. Okay, for some of these points, I'm just going to go through them. Again, doing leases gets you comfortable with the whole process as we indicated. And this is an obvious one, is that, when you build a connection, you build rapport with a client who in the future ends up transacting a purchase. It's a great way to build your database as you get into business. So again, what's in it for you as a new agent? It's a way of prospecting. You build up relationships. Real estate is a relationship business, so the more relationships you have out there, the more business you end up getting in the future. Key consideration, managing expectation of both landlord and tenants, depending on who you're representing at the time. If you're going to do a lot of, if you're going to deal with residential leases, you should get yourself familiar with a lot of the laws and rules and regulations when it comes to landlord's responsibility and tenants' responsibilities. One of the things with leases is that you can find yourself actually spending a lot of time trying to find a property for your clients. And the fact that you didn't spend the time to qualify your client could basically relate to a lot of work on your part. And you may not end up being able to transact or facilitate the lease for the client because you didn't properly qualify them. One of the other things that I always mention when doing leases is always pull your own credit report on your client. Don't have them email you one that could have been tampered with. A lot of the times when the clients are having a hard time getting accepted by landlords, they'll create a whole new identity. They'll produce fake documents. They'll email it to you. And what happens is you end up, sending it without qualifying it. You send it to the listing agent who takes it for face value sometimes, doesn't do their due diligence. And when the whole thing blows up, everybody's called to deal with it. And in the case where you're listing and you're taking that information and not qualifying it, you find yourself in a lot of trouble with your client. And then if it gets to the point where people are getting sued, we're all pulled into it, especially the brokerages. So always please do your due diligence, and whether you receive a credit report from a cooperating agent or you're the listing agent, always pull your own credit reports. Managing expectations on the landlord side, the income potential, conditions of the property, screening tenants, rules and regulations. On the tenant side, you have signing a BRA. This is very important. If at any time it makes sense to sign a BRA, it's when you're dealing with a tenant, a client tenant. For the compensation you're going to get on a lease, you want to make sure they're basically vested with you. You don't want to be spending time, energy, gas, trying to find them a place and not having a BRA in place to facilitate your transaction. Because in some cases, if a tenant finds another property or somebody introduces them to another property, then all the work you put into it is in vain. You're not going to get compensated. However, if you have a BRA in place, you can always ask for commission, whether you're asking from the listing agent who the client went to direct, or you're asking it from the buyer who signed it with you.
Sam, quick question here. If the
Yes.
tenant, for whatever reason, is reluctant to sign a BRA, is the deal at a dead end?
No, not necessarily. It's just going to be up to you whether or not you want to continue to spend time and effort trying to find this tenant client a property, because there's always that possibility that he walks away. Even though you have an implied agency, sometimes it's a lot harder to prove and for you to get your compensation. So in all honesty, after being in the business for a while, if I'm taking a client out to find them a place for rent, if they're not vested, if they're not going to sign a BRA from the beginning, I'm not going to waste my time. But in the beginning, when I first started, I took on anybody and everybody, and I just dealt with it. And everything that happened to me in the process of conducting my business in that sense, basically taught me a lot, and it helped me grow. So if you're willing to go through the punishment of, dealing with different personalities and trying to figure things out, you can do that. But at the end of the day, when you do find a property, we need all the paperwork. So at one point or another, they're going to have to sign all the paperwork anyway. There's applications now that you can actually download on your computer, on your phone. And, when you first meet the client, and while you're having a conversation, if you built that first connection, you can ask them for their driver's license, take a picture of it, and it will create the FinTrack documents for you. At which point you can come back to the office, fill out your working with a realtor, BRA, send it for e-signature. And once that you've got their buy-in and their commitment, then you take it to the next level. Another way you could do it is if they ask you to, show them one or two properties, basically what you can say that, we have a brokerage policy before we take out clients and show them property, we need these two forms in place. So the best time to get this information from them and buy-in is right at the beginning. Don't wait till the end.
Right. Let's say again, the same situation, if the buyer has not signed a BRA, can we run a credit report?
Well, usually you do that with the rental app, right? The rental application, right? So when they fill out the rent app, there's, I believe, a disclaimer there that you can run a credit report on them. And we're going to get to that in this.
Okay, all right.
So application process, okay. Counseling your landlord clients. Expect only 9.5 months of income per year. Plan for property to be vacant. A lot of investors will buy one unit and rent it out, and they're not really business savvy. They don't understand that once you become a landlord, you've ultimately become, a business. You're running a business, right? You've got the possibility of making money and losing money. And being a landlord, there's many different possibilities of losing money based on the tenant you brought into your property. So, you could bring in a tenant that stops paying you, another tenant that can destroy the property. And in every case, you actually have to sue in order to try to get, your compensation. And in most cases, these kind of tenants, we call them professional tenants in the industry. They know the ins and outs of the Landlord Tenant Act, and they know how to get around the system. And it's just going to give you a lot of heartache and grief. And in most cases, I've seen landlords that had one or two units after having a bad tenant, basically sold their properties and didn't want to be in that business any further. So really important to qualify the tenants you're bringing into a property. Repairs, right? Some tenants think that they can take a unit or a house, a property, and continue to rent it out without doing any repairs or keeping it up to date and asking the most amount of money for their property, and that doesn't happen. Maybe in a seller's market where there's a high demand for rentals and there isn't any, the price goes up, and whatever condition you get it in, you deal with it. Maybe you go in and do your own work to it. But when the market changes, if you want to get that property rented fairly quick, you have to bring it up to market value. And, every month that it stays vacant is basically reduces the income when you eventually lease it out. So what do I mean by that? So if you had a property that you were asking $3,000 a month for, you would make $36,000 a year on that property. Now, if you had a couple of offers where the tenant was basically offering, let's say hypothetically, $2,900 or $2,800, and you didn't want to accept that because you were holding off for $3,000, and the property stayed empty for 2-3 months. Well, you take that, $6,000 or $9,000 and divide it by 12, and then reduce, whatever you get monthly by that amount, and you end up finding that you rented out the property a lot less than 29 or 28 that you should have taken in the beginning instead of it staying empty. So that's the kind of thing that you have to basically address when you're dealing with a listing and your landlord. That sometimes it's better to transact, with what you have in hand, as long as it's win-win for everybody, as opposed to just holding off for that, $100 or $200 more a month. Okay, screening prospective tenants, right? So the Ontario Human Rights Code governs what landlords can ask prospective tenants, and what is considered as discrimination, right? So with that, again, I gotta move this around. What I've done here is I've created a folder. So Human Rights Code. Here we go. I don't know, can you see that? So basically what you want to do is you want to, bookmark a lot of the information that you're going to see in this course. Basically, where to find, the standard lease agreement that has to be signed. Now, even though it's part of web forms and it's in the listing kit, and I'll cover that later on. But rules and regulations, the landlord tenant board where you can get your forms. So there's a lot of information. If you're gonna do business on the lease side of real estate, you really need to get informed, and don't try to be the jack of all trades in this, because When a tenant goes bad and the landlord is looking for help, you need to have a good paralegal to refer them to, because that will just take so much time to deal with. And it's better to give it to somebody who specializes in this. And usually paralegals handle, um, bad tenants, if I could say that, or, tenants that basically stop paying or are creating problems for the landlord, whatever it may be, whether they're destroying the property, being loud, and this, causing grief for their neighbors. At the end of the day, you need a good paralegal. So ask around. I've got one or two that I can refer to you as well, but definitely you need to have that in your book of contacts. Okay, landlord client should always ask for Form 410 rental application, offer to lease, credit check, signing a BRA. The realtor's responsibility in leasing are just as great as with a sale transaction per REBA 2002. So tenants prospect should be treated the same way as a buyer prospect and receive an initial counseling session that explains representation, assign BRA as early as possible, which what we talked about. Again, so you can, basically, if you choose to do so, you can continue to do business with the client up to the point where they do sign the BRA. It's basically client level customer service representation at that point. Tenant assessment, find out what your tenant's client needs. That's a big one. So, usually you'll get a client that says, I'm looking for a property, and then they don't tell you that it needs to be in a certain location for the schools for their children. It needs to have a 2-car, garage or driveway. And then you go out there, you start, trying to find the right home for them. And, basically because you didn't spend the time to find out all their needs and wants at the beginning, you've spent more time than you needed to on a lease. And in all honesty, like I said, the faster you transact the lease, the better for you. And in the beginning, it's going to take time for you to learn all that. And you're just going to be excited to have a client that you're going to go beyond what you normally need to do, but it will be a learning curve. Again, that's part of the qualifications. You need to know what their wants are, their wishes, where they need, what location, what they can afford. Sometimes they can afford more than what they tell you. So if somebody says to me, I'm looking for a property to lease between, let's say for 2,700, I'll send an alert to them, let's say, and I'll look for homes between 2,500 to 3,500, because sometimes that 3,200 property that they may not have had the money for initially ends up being the property that they take. And that's because, the market changes and what's, available for lease at the time, varies, right? So what they really need is a property that's going for 3,200, but they wanted to pay 2,700 for it. When they realize that that's not the case, they end up transacting the $3,200 property. This is another website that you want to also put into your bookmarks. A lot of the times, with respect to pets, the question arises where it's illegal. It's illegal to basically discriminate against a tenant that has a pet. With the exception of condominiums. Condominiums have their own restrictions. So you cannot really deny a tenant the right to lease your property because they have a dog or a cat. Even though, it is your property, and you can always say that you prefer not to have pets, or you'd rather have a non-smoker than a smoker. Once the tenant moves in, even though they've agreed that, they don't have pets or what have you, and then they purchase a pet later on, you can't kick them out based on that. And it becomes a legal battle. You would have to have legal representation in order to take it as far as evicting somebody based on something which is basically against the rules. So always try to figure out your clients, try to, match the prospective tenant with the landlord if you're representing the landlord. And if you're representing the tenant, then make sure that basically the ins and outs of what their requirements are. So you don't try to put them into a property that's going to create a problem for you in the future, because ultimately you're going to have to deal with it. Landlord entry. So, you can have entry to the property within 24 hours of written notice to the tenant. In an emergency, I guess between 8 and 8 p.m., you can have access. You don't have to wait 24 hours. That's if there's a flood, any kind of an issue happening. Changing locks. Tenant cannot change a lock on their own. They have to get consent from the landlord. And if that happens, then basically the landlord has rights, and they can basically try to rectify that. Again, whenever you get into a conflict with a tenant, it doesn't end. It doesn't end well. How notice to terminate? It's a 60-day notice, 2 months notice, and must be on the last rental period, last day of the rental period. So what does that mean? If you rent a property out for 1 year, and you want to give notice, once it goes month to month, you have to give them 60 days notice. However, can a tenant actually terminate a tenancy before the term of the lease expires? So there's a lot of buzz around this question. So you have an agreement for 1 year, but the tenant situation changes 6 months in or 8 months in. So most people think that you can just ask for the remainder of the rent. I don't think it's that easy. And if it goes to court, and I've spoken to a lot of paralegals, so what happens, you have to mitigate your loss. What you do, the first thing you do is, you listen to the reason why they have to vacate. Maybe it's out of their hands, change of employment, divorce, whatever it may be. First thing you do is you put the property on the market for lease, and you try to replace that tenant. So you basically mitigate your loss. And you can ask for compensation based on the fact that you paid the realtor's expense already, right? The 1 month plus HST. So if you get a mutual understanding, sometimes it works out. However, when push comes to shove, I believe if the tenant decides to give you 60 days, even before the term is over, that they pretty much are free to go. However, could you sue them in small claims court? You probably could. And how long that takes and how much it costs, and do you really want to go down that path, would be entirely up to you.
So I have a question here. Typically, with the lease, the landlord would ask the tenant to provide like a first and last month's rent. So the last month's rent goes towards the last month's, of course, the rental, or kind of a security deposit, if you will. So once that year is passed, now the tenant is on a month to month. That security deposit is gone. Is there a way to ask for another like a month's deposit just to keep that as a security deposit?
Well, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to go away, because they can continue to pay monthly, and they don't utilize that security deposit, right? So let's say it ends in December, and you have the month of December's rent as a security deposit, but they're going to stay on. So they would still pay you on December 1st rent. And that deposit is just still, held in trust with you. So,
Sometimes it doesn't happen because, if they are intending not to extend, let's say, and at the last moment they say, okay, now we need to extend. So they've already consumed that last month.
yeah, well, if they don't plan on staying further, they need to give you a 60 days notice before the end of the term of the lease, right? So 60 days before the lease ends, they got to let you know if they're staying or leaving. So if
Correct.
they say they're staying, then they won't consume the December month, right?
Right.
In this case, the term is at the end of December. If they say that they are leaving, then right away, what you need to do is you need to sign the proper end forms. And we're going to get to that next as well.
Okay.
Make
Right.
sure that everybody is committed to them vacating. Because what happens is, and this comes up a lot where whether you continue to lease out the property or you want to put it for sale, if the tenant says he's leaving, let's say December, at the end of December, and you put it in the market because you've got 60 days to try to find another tenant, and you rent it out for the next year, January 1st or January 2nd, and the tenant decides not to leave, you've got a problem because you need to get that tenant out. You've already leased it to another tenant, and it becomes a nightmare again. And right now, the way things are, basically with COVID and the fact that the government, Doug Ford, God bless him, he's coming on TV and telling tenants that they don't have to pay the rent. And some of them are actually finding themselves getting evicted, even though apparently, he also said that you can't be evicted. Well, guess what? A lot of people are getting evicted because they've stopped paying their rent. With that said, I definitely believe that in certain times you need to vacate the property before you deal with it, whether you're going to sell it or whether you're going to release it, because you don't know from one day to another what the mindset is of the tenant that's living in your property.
I think you rightly said that. Let's say if the tenant agrees to leave and he gives a notice and agreed to vacate. And if you want to list the property and put it in the market, but the tenant is reluctant basically or sort of refuses to let you show the property during the current, based on the current situation. So what is the option basically here?
In all honesty, you really don't have any options, because what happens is that, based on COVID, and a lot of tenants are afraid of catching COVID or, allowing anybody into their home. So basically they can deny any kind of physical showings.
Yeah.
Right. You could do virtual showings, and if somebody's going to rent a place or buy it based on a virtual viewing only, that will be up to them entirely. But
Right.
with the token, whatever forms they sign or whatever commitment they give you, it may not play out, right? So if it doesn't play out, when the new tenant arrives, you've got a nightmare on your hand, right?
Absolutely.
And I've seen this play out in the industry where, the agents basically lost their commission. The landlord was, paid a compensation because they had all their furniture packed up to move into the new place, so they couldn't get in. So, you really got to be careful. It's always great until something goes wrong.
Yeah.
So on here, basically, you're seeing all the different forms that you need to familiar yourself with. Again, you get those, and I'll send you the links. But if you Google Form N8 or N11, it'll take you right to the forms. I don't want to break out of this again because it takes a bit to get back in. We'll just continue. Any questions around these forms?
There's a question in the chat, Sam, from Liping. She says, if a landlord terminates the lease, regardless of the reason, even if for sale or personal reclamation, the landlord will compensate 1 month rent to the tenants.
That's correct. So right now, if you're on a month to month, and you can't do it when there's a lease term in place. But if you're on a month to month, and the landlord needs the home for themselves or an immediate family member, they would compensate you 1 month. However, if they told you that they were going to use it for themselves, whether a family member or they're going to move in, and you end up moving out, then you take the 1 month compensation. And then you find out that they actually did not move in or put it back on the market for a higher rent, you would report them and they would be in a position maybe to be fined $25,000. It doesn't go to the tenant, but it is a fine to the landlord. Okay, so, and a lot of landlords basically, they try their luck. They hope that doesn't happen. And they use the excuse that a family member is moving in because they want to go in there, clean it up, paint it, whatever, and put it for sale or raise the rent. So you have to be really careful with that. And if you're representing the landlord, sometimes they don't understand that. And you might want to bring it to their attention. And in other cases where, the owners are looking to sell the property, and normally the way it's supposed to happen right now, the process is that you speak to your tenant, you put it for sale, and hopefully the tenant cooperates. And when the transaction actually completes, then basically you're allowed to give the tenant 60 days notice, right? But it doesn't mean that the tenant's still going to leave. And sometimes you have to compensate them. And like if you look at a situation where, let's say you bought the property for $400,000, it's been rented, you've rented it out all along, and now you're selling it for, hypothetically, we'll say, based on the market now, $900, $1 million, and the tenant is not cooperating. Excuse me. You may have to actually pay them out. Like you may, I had a client who had a tenant and he wanted to sell his townhouse, and he actually offered the tenant $20,000 to move out before he even put it for sale. He said, listen, if you know what, I'll pay the difference in your rent if if rent has changed that drastically, or I'll just give you $20,000 just to move out so I can go in there, clean up the place and put it for sale. And that for him, that made sense. Like to pay that $20,000 was worth it to get him out there, out of the unit, because with all the repairs that it needed, it would actually get him more money if it was repaired before it was put on the market. So ultimately that's a businessman, right? That's a person who actually understands that, he's entered into a business venture. It's not just one-off. He's got maybe, 10 properties, and he understands that maybe he's got to spend a little to make more, and he understands that in a business venture, you're not always making money. Like some landlords think that it's only one way. They're always making money. The tenant calls them and says, the dishwasher is broken, and they go, well, I'm not going to fix it. Or it's an old, stove and it needs to be replaced. And he goes, you know what, let's just fix it. And, with the cost of fixing the stove and the price of a brand new stove, you might as well buy a brand new stove, right? And so there's, if you're going to be a landlord, you got to play fair. Like you can't be one-sided. You can't be always looking to make money and not spend money. Okay, subletting. So here's a situation where you've got assignments and subletting. And with subletting is basically, if you still want the property, but you're not going to need it for a couple of months, and you sublease it to somebody, a friend, family member, and then take over, after a couple of months. You continue to pay the landlord. You collect from the tenant that you've put in place, and you pay the landlord. So you're still basically on the hook for everything with respect to the property and the landlord. Again, you have to get the landlord's consent before you can do that. And the landlord cannot deny you basically unreasonable and hold you to the lease, right? When it comes to okay, tenants are not allowed to charge. Oh, right, so let's cover that. So if you're basically renting it for $3,000 a month, you can't charge more than what you're paying the landlord. So normally you'll charge the same or a little bit less to give somebody the incentive to come in for a couple of months. With respect to an assignment, this is where you've basically given up all the obligations to a new tenant. So you assign the property to somebody else, as long as, again, you've got the consent of the landlord, and the landlord is comfortable with the new tenant and all the terms. Then you can basically give them 30 days notice and terminate the agreement. I won't even attempt that one. Sandra, are you aware of the other part here with the 7 days?
No, I missed that. That obviously needs to be updated.
Yeah, I'm not sure what. Okay,
I'll make a note. Thanks.
thanks. So subletting versus assigning, again, it speaks to itself. Intent to resume if you're subletting, leaving for good. Is everybody okay with that? I'm just going to go back to that slide out. Everybody okay to move on?
No questions. You're good.
Okay. Deposits and payments of rent. So really, the only rent deposit you can hold is the last month, right? Post-dated checks, landlords can ask for it, but cannot require them. So in a lot of cases, you'll see in the Schedule B that the landlord would like post-dated checks, right? And if you agree to that, well and good, you can give them post-dated checks. But if you don't want to, you don't have to. And when you're new to the country and you're trying to find a place to live for yourself and your family, chances are you're going to agree to anything just to get into a place. And one of the things also aside from this is that, in most cases, when you're new to the country, you don't have a credit score. You may be not employed yet as yet. You do have the money to cover the rent for a number of years, but based on the requirements that that you have a job, that you have a credit score, a good credit score, and all that doesn't apply. So what happens sometimes is 1 year is requested, or 6 months up front, right? And that's basically against the landlord and tenant rules and bylaws. However, you can get into a situation where the person does agree to all that, and then he backs out after he's in the property and says, what, it wasn't explained to me. This put me in a financial situation. I want my money back. And it creates a problem, right? So again, you can be reasonable with your request if you're representing the landlord. What I like to do when I'm representing a landlord is I would ask for 3 months, right? I would ask for the first month and the last 2 months. So the last 2 months I'm holding instead of the last month, that gives me enough time to actually deal with the tenant if they stop paying rent on the second month once they've entered. So as soon as they're late in their payment, I react quickly and communicate and find out what's going on. And if they do not make a payment, then I have 2 months actually to try to get them evicted or terminate their tenancy. And again, having a good paralegal is always recommended. Rental increases, again, you can go on the website and find out what the rental increases are. I believe the newer properties are exempt from rent control. And again, you basically you can only do it every 12 months and you got to stick within the guidelines, unless of course you have exemptions where you've done major renovations. You can ask to increase the rent past the guidelines. You must give the tenants at least 90 days notice of any increase. Again, you got to use the guidelines, unless of course it's vacant. Once a property becomes vacant, you can basically ask whatever the market is at the time, or you can ask whatever you want. If you get it, then basically it's allowed at that point. Let me move this. Yeah, so this here, I don't know if you can see it, but it's below this bar here. Again, it says that you can apply to increase the rent, based on any repairs you've done above the guidelines. Okay, here we go. Boilerplate offers and clauses, right? Okay, so on the listing side, when you go into web forms, if you basically select the templates to list a property for lease, whether that be a condo or a freehold, what I've done is I've copied all of Mark Weisleiter's landlord geared clauses. They're all pretty much protecting the landlord. Some of them protect both parties, but in most cases, it's geared more towards the landlord side of interest. You'll find that in the templates on their listing for lease, for condos, and for freehold. As far as the offer to lease for condos and freehold, I actually didn't provide any I didn't provide any clauses because it's not as easy as a purchase. Every property is different. So what I could suggest again to you is that, I'm going to break out of this one more time, is that you download the OREA clauses, right? And with that, basically, if you don't know what you're looking for, if you don't know how to search for the right clause, what this does is it gives you a ledger of all the different clauses you can use. And if you go to lease, so these are lease / commercial, and then you come down a bit further here and you go to residential. So these are the different clauses that you can use when presenting an offer to lease a residential property. If you click on the link, it'll take you to the actual clause, right? You don't have to cut and paste this. You don't have to cut and paste this because all of this is on web forms under the system clauses. And basically, if you use this naming convention right here, you can pull up the clause. However, if you didn't know that the clause existed to begin with, you wouldn't know how to search for it. So I recommend that you download this, this document and keep it on your computer and refer to it whenever you need to basically reference what could possibly be used in any of your offers. And that goes for purchases as well. Okay. The only thing you're not going to find here is basically clauses when it comes to purchasing businesses. So to lease commercial space, yes, but clauses when it comes to purchasing businesses, you're not going to find. Okay, and it does cover quite a bit of stuff. So always I recommend that you download it, and if you're comfortable logging into OREA and getting it at that, on their website as opposed to having it on your computer. That way you'll always have an up-to-date version. So it's up to you how you access this, but definitely I recommend you have it, or how to get to it at least. Okay. Let's do that again. So if you're going to have, so you don't need, for listing, you don't need one for landlords. We already have it. And if actually, you know what, do you want me to show you where that is just for your own knowledge, or you're comfortable with where you could find it? Anybody? Schedule A for landlords?
Yeah, sure.
Would you like me to show you where that is?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, when you're logged into web forms, let me just drop this down again. So ultimately, you can create your template from an old listing in the system. And then once you're on the listing, you just click web forms and it will populate some of the information. I'm just going to create one from scratch. And I'm going to call it test listing for lease for now. Okay, and I'm going to select, now it doesn't matter whether it's a condo or a freehold. Well, I can barely see this. Okay, here we go, condo. Listing template for lease, right? So I'll select that. And I'm the listing agent, as indicated at the bottom. Again, whenever you create a kit, it takes you through the 5-step wizard here. I like to kind of bypass that and go right to the forms. This is your listing document. This is your working with a realtor. You've got your MLS data sheets for both the Oakville Milton and Treb. And the Ontario here, this is the standard lease. This is the Ontario standard lease right here. You all see that? And the fact that we are able to put it in here, it's made it editable. So I'm not sure if you get a lot of fields populating into this at this point, but the web forms providers basically provided us with an editable document. So it's always recommended that if you're going to list a property for a landlord, that you fill this out, because if you don't fill it out, it creates an issue for the landlord. So it's part of your listing kit. And then there's your Schedule A right here. And if you open that up, so once you fill out all the information in your template or your kit, it will populate the landlord's name, the location of the property, and then the only thing that will be missing is the tenant's name and the date that they submitted the offer. And with that, you've got 6 pages of clauses. Now, do you have to use them all? Not necessarily. You can, you can highlight anything you don't want to use and delete it. Now, once you've decided what you're going to keep and what you're going to delete, this becomes part of your listing paperwork. And what you do then is you can do one of 2 things. You can actually load it to the MLS listing on the board, or you can load it into Broker Bay as an attachment that only goes out to anybody who registers an offer. So when they register an offer on Broker Bay, this gets emailed to them as a Schedule A that you want them to use. And you can have instructions in your message to say, please use our Schedule A. So I don't know if you've seen a lot of leases, but in some cases, we've listed a property and we get a lease agreement with 1 or 2 clauses. They've got nothing in there. Well, that's well and good if they don't want to protect their client, the tenant, but we want to protect the landlord, our client, right? So if anything, you can use them all or you can cut out whatever you need, but you definitely need to have your own Schedule A when you're representing the landlord. So take the time to look at it. It's in the kits. Very, very highly recommended to use. Also, whenever you list, I've attached our Schedule B here as well, which you can also upload. So there's your Schedule B, the trust. If you open that up again, all the information from our end will be populated into the form. You will save it as a PDF and you'll either attach it to Broker Bay or you will attach it to the MLS listing. Okay, it makes it easier. It's not a flat file so that you can put information in it. Is everybody comfortable with that?
Sam, how do you attach this to the Broker Bay? I'm not sure if that is part of this session today, but maybe you can quickly just go over that.
Sure. I'm actually going to do a Broker Bay session for templates and attachments and offer presentations. But just to give you a quick answer to that question is once this is all filled out and you want to make this form part of your listing paperwork or your lease paperwork when somebody's presenting you with an offer. What you do is you come over here, you can either print it as a PDF or save it as a PDF. I always like to print it as a PDF. Now, assuming that it has the landlord's name and the address of the property, we're just going to click on print. And again, print here and save it as a PDF, right? So now we have an attachment that we can upload to Broker Bay or we can upload to the board, right? So I will actually save this. So we have an example, and maybe I'll quickly go into, so this will be our Schedule B, I believe. Okay, and save. Oh, sorry, that was Schedule A. My bad. Let me do that again. Could have just renamed it, but just as easy. Schedule B. Okay, here we go. Okay, so now that I've saved the Schedule A, I guess I don't have to show you how you would load it on the MLS system. It'd be part, just like you load your pictures, there's attachments, and then you could basically label them as schedules or floor plan or what have you. This will be a schedule. And in the broker's comment, you'll say, please download our Schedule A or use our Schedule A from the attachments. As far as Broker Bay goes, I believe I have 1, 2, 3. What did I call it? 1, 2, 3 Test Street. So 1, 2, 3 Test Street. Basically, if you click on appointments, I gave access to this to somebody else. Let me see if I can edit it still. Okay, edit. Configure. Where is it? Eyes are going on me. I gotta make this bigger. Sorry. Listing contacts. Sandra, you're probably more familiar with this than I am. Why am I have? Usually, I can just select my name and add it.
Sorry, Sam, I have not been paying attention whatsoever and have no idea what you're doing.
Just trying to. I was trying to change the salesperson on this because it was actually initially my listing, but I gave access to Jay, and just trying to add
Change
myself.
the listing agent.
The listing agent.
Go to edit listing. Don't you do it there?
So
Back out.
Back out of here.
There on the right,
So,
edit listing under the green button.
Right. Okay, here we go. Thank you.
There you
So
go.
here we go. There we go. So let's delete that. Choose an agent. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So now we save that. Okay, so for appointments, configure appointments. You'd put in all your information here. And I need to be on offers, as a matter of fact. So when somebody registers an offer, offer settings. You see here how we added the wiring funds, right? So right here, or you can create a template. You can add another document, right? So these are all the different fields you can add to this document. And yeah, you can't do it here. So you have to do it in your templates, unfortunately. So let's go to templates. And under templates, I have here an offer registration template, right? And I'll show you how to do that. But if I wanted to, I'd edit this here. And I can, let's just say hypothetically put it here. You know, please use please use our Schedule A, right? And then you would just add it. Upload a file, drag and drop. And you know, you probably just do this once in your template. And again, because I'm using a small screen here, it's taking me a little bit longer, but this could be our Schedule A right here. Downloads. Where is Schedule A? You drag it, you put it here. Obviously that didn't work. Let's try that again. No, that's not going to work. Just click here. Go to where it is. Double click. And it goes in. So you'll notice that there's a link here now to Schedule A. Right? And if I click on that, it should open up Schedule A. Well, once I save it. So now, if I go back to test, and I go into offers, and I click on offer setting, I have to select mine. And there it is right there, right? So if I save this now, and you were to register an offer on this property, you would get what, I'm not going to bother doing it right now, but basically you would get the information that's in the template. You would get an email with this. So the wiring fund instruction, the Schedule A, and so on, right? So I don't know if this was too confusing, but again, with this small screen, it kind of takes me a little bit more time. But have I answered the question, Said, or Said?
Said, you're muted. Said, you're muted. I don't think he can hear us. Said, you're
Okay.
muted. Oh, I think it looks like he's on the phone.
Okay, so basically, you know, going back to clauses, whenever you're gonna, basically deal with rentals, you want to make sure you have your templates, for your Schedule A for the listing and your Schedule A when you're representing the tenant. So in our listing templates, you already have, 6 pages of clauses. And on the offer to lease side, you may want to create your own clauses that you use on a regular basis, at which point, you can create your own template, and then insert those clauses into the, offer to lease form. And this is basically information on the landlord and tenant board, in case you want to get a hold of them. And also, I can break away from this. Again, the links are all, wow. Okay, here we go. We can provide you with all the bookmarks for the different URLs or websites that you may need to get to. If you wanted to go to the Human Rights tab, the Landlord and Tenant Board, you want to click on Forms. Here you'll find all of the landlord. So these are all the landlord forms, and these are all the tenant forms. And there's subcategories here if you choose to use them. For notice of termination, you have all the forms here. And I would suggest that, they have instructions now, which is good, how do you fill them out, how to use them. I would suggest that you bookmark these locations, because whenever they're updated, you'll have the up-to-date information, as opposed to downloading it and then not having the proper forms, when you're filling it out, and then you'll have to go through the whole process again. And it's a timely process. So I would suggest that you bookmark all of the relevant tabs for dealing it with leases. And I think with that, it pretty much concludes, unless you have any questions.
Sam, can I confirm that our collection of suggested lease clauses are in our web forms templates that you've created? Are they there?
Yes, they are. I just actually, I was in there.
It might have been when I stepped away, so sorry if I missed that. I just wanted to make sure that they were in fact there.
Yeah, so
Sandra?
let me just.
Sandra,
Yeah, Bart.
I just looked on the Aurea website and they're listed the 2021s. They're available. You have to sign in, then you can download them.
Awesome.
This is for which one? Sorry, I didn't know who's that. Bart? Was that you, Bart?
That was me. That was me.
The ones on Aurea is that just the single clauses, or is there a whole bunch of clauses geared for lease?
I had to sign in, so I didn't actually log in. I just saw like the 2021 clauses in French and English,
Right.
and they're available to download, or like you said, if you log in, you'll get the most up-to-date ones.
You're talking about these, right? January.
That's the one that you showed us earlier.
Yeah, that's the ones on Aurea. I downloaded this from Aurea.
Okay.
So these are all the system clauses, but the beauty about this document is it shows you what's available. So if you don't know what's in there, you don't know really what to search for. But if you come to this table of contents and you see what's available, basically when you go back to the web forms and search for clauses to use, you can use the abbreviation here and pull out that clause. So for instance, let's do this condo one here.
Hang on, Sam, you stopped sharing your screen.
Oh, wow, sorry. Let me go back. Share screen, here we go. Okay. This is the document right here. Okay, sorry. So this is the document part. It's January 1st, 2021, the residential commercial clauses, right? And again, the beauty about this again is that it gives you a ledger of all the system clauses that are in the system on web forms. And like I said, if you don't know what you're looking for, this is a great place to visit because you can look at all the lease, residential lease clauses, right? And if you click on this, it'll take you right to the clause and you could read it. So if this is the one you want to use, you could use the abbreviation here in web forms and it'll pull up the same contents as you see here, right? So just going back to the question of whether or not the landlord clauses are in the template. Again, if I go to the templates and we go to the listing templates for lease. So this is listing templates for lease right here. On the condo side and on the freehold side, you'll find Schedule A and Schedule B, which is the trust. But if you click on Schedule A, it will have the 6 pages of clauses that you would use when you create your listing kit. And these are basically the ones that Mark Weisleiter presented to us when he did the course. So they're thorough and cover a lot of issues with respect to, you know, tenants and landlords. So again, if you can delete whatever you don't need. I usually will leave them all in if I was you, and I'd leave, I'd put the onus.
Bruce has a question. Can we do offers to lease through Broker Bay? And if so, can we do AuthentiSign through them as well? Or did Sam freeze? Sam, you froze. Sam froze. Bruce, the answer to your question is yes. I hate to answer for Sam, but yes, the answer to your question is if the lease is on MLS, of course, you can register your offers and manage your communication through, oh, he totally got booted out. Look at that. You can manage your communication and do offers through Broker Bay, upload your clauses and your lists and all that kind of stuff through Broker Bay the same way that Sam just showed you. And can you sign leases and offers through AuthentiSign and web forms? Yeah, absolutely. There's no restrictions there in terms of how you use them. So the answer is yes. Are there any other questions? Like I said, I sort of zoned out there for a little while and was getting some other work done. I saw that there were some questions. Yeah.
I asked if offers and AuthentiSign can be done through Broker Bay, and you're saying yes?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Broker Bay is our showing management and offer management platform.
Totally, but okay. But they every time we speak to them, it seems like they've got a new feature. And I just wondered if they were getting to the stage where you can do offers through them.
No, not quite yet. No. So you can register your offer through them and you can upload attachments to be sent to people. So I think what Sam was mostly referring to is that if somebody is registering an offer on a lease, then you can upload the your Schedule B or your Schedule A that you want a tenant to use in their offer to Broker Bay, so that when they register their offer, then they get that schedule that you want the tenants to be able to sign and submit with their offer. That's what Sam was referring to.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know it can be kind of confusing with all the different platforms and technologies that we throw at you guys and expect you to use. Another thing that we should be doing to ensure their Schedule A's and B's are sent out to any prospective purchasers or buyers is to upload them as an attachment into the MLS as well. So for those of you that are upload or broker loading your own listings, do make sure that you upload those items as attachments into your listings or submit them to front desk, because they can add them as attachments to the listings as well.
Just a question to Sam, because I'm currently dealing with the leasing situation and from the tenant side. So the listing agent has been asking us to prepare the Schedule B. Is it applicable from the tenant side to fill a Schedule B?
Yeah, if the listing agent is asking you to fill out their Schedule B, then there's items on it that they want your tenant to agree to. And so you do have an obligation to go through the items in that schedule with your tenant to determine if they are agreeable to whatever is on that schedule. Maybe they're all acceptable, or maybe you want to negotiate or cross a few out, but you will need to go through those details.
that could also go into Schedule A, won't it?
I mean, Schedule A and Schedule B are, you know, they're just letters on a schedule. It doesn't really mean anything. You could have an individual clause on 17 different schedules and it doesn't really change anything. Having separate schedules really just kind of keeps certain things separate. So the Schedule A in this case would be the collaboration of clauses that you added for your tenant, and then the Schedule B would be what the landlord is giving you that they want them to agree to. So really just having different letters is just a separation of a collection of clauses. And I see that Sam is back. Welcome back, Sam.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. Our internet here is up and down. It has its own mind, but
Okay, I was able to toe the line for you, so it's all good.
okay, fantastic. Did you want me to go back to where the schedule is in the templates or no?
I think we might have, as long as Bruce's question was answered and he doesn't want to go back and have a visual look again. But I think
Okay.
I was able to answer it for you. Yeah, Bruce is good. I think we're good for that, Sam.
Okay, fantastic.
So the next question that's come up is, can you use credit scores from the US for your tenants just coming to Canada? That's from Christiana.
You know, I mean, if you can verify where they're coming from, I say, you know, go ahead, but use, use your own judgment when it comes to dealing with things of that nature. You probably want to get a visual of the person that's coming. So you might want to meet them physically, not just over Zoom. Sometimes you get a gut instinct of whether or not, they're lying or they've tampered with the documentation, right? You still want referrals. You still want to check them up on Facebook. You want to call their employer. You want to do your due diligence, because right now, in all honesty, there's a lot of fraudulent activity happening around leases, because when families are having a hard time leasing a property, sometimes they'll do creative things to try to secure a place to live. So definitely do your due diligence, and I wouldn't accept anything that's provided. I'd always want it from the source.
Jyoti says, I've had cases where landlords have asked for a full year's lease. How do you suggest to tackle that?
Again, if you're representing the tenant, and the tenant really has no choice, they've hit a wall every time they've tried to rent. Is it legal? No, it's not legal. But if the tenant is willing to pay 1 year's rent up front, if that's the only way they can secure a place, then it'd be entirely up to them to engage in that kind of a transaction. You can't ask for 1 year's rent up front, but if it happens that this situation arises and the tenant is willing to do it, then it's up to them. But you should always mention it on the APS that the tenant has decided to do this out of their own free will, that they weren't coerced into doing so. And they understand basically that it's not a normal practice, but in their case, because they're new to the country, they don't have, a credit score, and they still are not gainfully employed, that this is, the landlord's way of securing their interest. So whether or not they want to engage in that kind of an arrangement, it'd be entirely up to them. But I'll tell you, if I was new to the country and I have a family that I have to put into a shelter, if I can afford to do it, I'll do it. It's just the way the ball rolls, I guess, right?
Sometimes tenants can be perceived as more reliable if they've got, 15 grand in cash, that they're $25,000 in cash that they're willing to hand over to secure lease for a year. So, sometimes it can do that. Jyoti has added, sometimes listing agents don't want that amount to be placed on the lease agreement. As a listing agent, or even as a tenant's representative, would you recommend going that route, Sam?
Well, I mean, they don't want to put it on there because it's illegal, right? So they're just basically, the fact that it's happening, it doesn't negate the fact that it's illegal, right? So even if it doesn't get put on the APS, and the tenant wants to dispute it after the fact, and claims that they weren't properly informed, and they don't want to, deposit that much money with the landlord, they could probably ask for it back. They can dispute it, at the landlord and tenant board and request it. Chances are the landlord will have to actually give it back to them.
I've seen that happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Christiana says, you mentioned new buildings are exempt from rent control. By how much can landlords for new buildings increase the rent?
You know what, if you go to the Landlord and Tenant Board, there's actually an article on it. And I can't remember how many years back. I think it's the last 4 years that it doesn't fall under the rent control. So you can increase it, whatever you need to increase it. So let's just say hypothetically, and actually this happened, let's say a year back, condominiums were, or 2 years back, they were renting for, you know, 1 bedrooms were going downtown for 17, 18, and then they went up to 27. And basically that's a huge adjustment, right? And you're allowed to do that when they're fairly new units within the last 4 years, I believe, but I have to verify the date. There is no rent control. So if the market dictates, you know, a certain amount at that given time, you can ask for that amount. Specifically when the lease term has ended. Like you can't ask within the term of the lease, right? Once they go month to month or they want to renew for another year, you can ask whatever the market value is at that time. And with respect to the standard lease, if the landlord doesn't provide the standard lease to the tenant and the tenant requests it, the landlord has 21 days to provide it. If he doesn't provide it within 21 days, the tenant can withhold the rent until he gets that standard lease. Not only that, I believe there's also a penalty of 1 month rent. I got to verify that, but that also may be the case. So that's why I always say, if you're representing the landlord, you need to provide that standard lease. Hence, that's why it's in our templates.
No other questions coming in, Sam?
Okay, great. Well, hopefully it was an informative session, and we'll, I guess, do some modification to it to make it more interesting.
Okay, everybody, if that's it, if you have any further questions and follow up, as always, you can reach Sam directly. He's always a wealth of information and certainly one of my favorites.
Thank you.
And I'm always at your service as well. So everyone have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much, Sam. As always, it's a pleasure to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You all have a great weekend. We'll see many of you next week. Cheers.
Take care. Bye-bye.